We're now going to move to our second talk about the dissenting red self and then Hejinian's Tribuna'l and Carson's Autobiography of Red, which will be presented by Jennifer K. Dick. So Jennifer is an author, translator, teacher, and poetry event organizer. She is the director of the English department, CA member, and maître de conférence at the University of Haute, Alsace. She teaches American literature, creative writing, and civilization, and is a member of the ILE Research Lab. Her academic research explores the overlapping fields of poetry and visual poetics. Previous work on Carson appears in On Carson, Ecstatic Liar, and Point Dot Period, the dynamics of punctuation in text and image. And now, Jennifer, the floor is yours.
As you can see here, I've added a third author to what I had proposed to talk about, which is Bhanu Kapil's Incubation. I am going to, in general, talk in two parts. The first will provide a variety of sort of critical ways, context for the work in looking at red, and the second will be a part looking at short examples of red in each book, more specifically before a very quick conclusion. A Human of Mars, in Hejinian's Tribuna'l, opens, I am a human in the absence of others of a yet better red. Well, the central story in Anne Carson's Autobiography of Red begins in a world described as made of red dirt, where the character, Jerian, is overwhelmed going to school on his first day. Children poured around him, and the intolerable red assault of grass and the smell of grass everywhere was pulling him towards it. He stood on his small red shadow and thought what to do next. In the first pages of Bhanu Kapil's Incubation, there is a red dress, a picture of a woman facing a red wall, her palms dragging the red down, and a writer writing who asks the question, what comes next for a red girl? And declares, sometimes you are not the red of technology, but monstrous or infrared, visible through the walls of a house. In short, all three poetry books center around red as their novel-like anti-hero underdog characters ponder the riddle that persists. Who am I? They navigate complex interrogations of interior and exterior worlds as their existence is entirely defined by red. Red is the color of dissent, of fire and flares or warning signs for Hejinian's Alien, which can be seen as equally true for Kapil's Lalu, a hitchhiker, cyborg, or monster, and Carson's monster Jerian, based on the Greek story of Heracles, who heroically slayed him for his red cattle, but who may also be, in her work, a phoenix-like immortal Yaksamak. In these works, red remains connected to its traditional symbolisms: rage, violence, war, desire, sexual promiscuity, flesh-blood, skin flushed with shame or love, and Marxist politics. Red is rebellious and may evoke the alien foreign planet Mars, or the equally unattainable molten liquid center of our own planet Earth. Yet in these works, red is most significantly related to, oh, sorry, I can't make my PowerPoint go forward. Can't make my PowerPoint go forward. Oh, there. Sorry. So most significantly related to transformation, a red deep fire, the life force of lava, the Earth's center bubbling out to form new land, at once a destructive and constructive force. As such, red provides color-based symbolic ramifications for the definition of an alternate radical self-identity. As Hejinian's Human of Mars states, I depart, separating from myself, and become a red image of it. What these works also share is that they pair writing on or about characters and self at once, marrying alternative autobiographical practice with fictionalized selves, inhabiting red avatars in which one might see a contemporary practice of exploring emergent allegorical plural selves in and through the writing. I would go so far as to argue that this metafictional writing practice is a very conscious, perhaps feminist undertaking, anchored in a response to the past for each woman author individually, but also for the authorial voice of women as a whole, gender-wise. Women in the creative process used to be object or echo of the naming, not the original voice, the author, the I speaker. Thus, the American poet and critic Kathleen Fraser revisited the myth of echo to ask of Narcissus, where am I, as opposed to what or who? For Echo knows who she is, but may not be able to understand why she has been erased from the context around her, the geography that others inhabit. Women are, for Fraser, quote, learning to move out from under the perception of non-presence, that uncounter, unwritten part of one's experience, entering into the activity of articulation, attempting the struggle within the inhibiting field of established precedent. To this end, women are seeking new methods of articulating, reversing precedents to open this inhibiting field. Here, autobiography doesn't unveil, but rather layers a self or selves through the language and fictions, myths, monsters, extraterrestrials in this case, of the world, conveying both the self and the echo. These authors are articulating a singular and plural self frequently conveyed across and through the polysemic nuances of the color red. The desire is to express a mobile and mobilized self, at times including the monstrosity and the beauty, the inside and the outside of the world, personal and political or other histories, speaking out of the self both as someone perceived and as perceiver, as formed and as forming. One could add to this as writer and as character, subject of writing, as reader and the one being read. Such slippery practices explode the previously employed styles of expression found in poetry, autobiography, and fiction, abandoning the idea of unveiling the self for a moment of recognition by readers to propose various selves where the self itself may not even become visible to the reader. Red, as used in this manner, blinds readers with a red eye photo flash reflection where clear definition of subject remains unseeable. In so doing, these authors are making a dynamic rather than a reflective space, an inclusive emergent poetics. As Susan Howe asks in her well-known My Emily Dickinson, at the blind point between what is said and meant, who is sounding herself? Words open to the names inside them, coursed through thought in precarious play of double enchantment, distance. In other words, as Hejinian wrote in her essay collection, The Language of Inquiry, the, quote, essentialist yearning after truth and origin, meaning self as named via locating one's past, is discarded in favor of the experience of experience. As she suggests a few pages farther on, the person in this view is a mobile and mobilized reference point. And in this case, subjectivity is not an entity, but a dynamic, much like what is expressed in Donna Haraway's essay, The Promises of Monsters, a regenerative politics for inappropriated others, which Kapil quotes at the start of her book, citing, quote, organisms emerge from a discursive process. The organism in Kapil's, but also Hejinian's and Carson's books, will navigate an unfixed combinatorial logic, as Haraway put it, of self-definition in what Lainey Brown calls a book akin to movement as a form of identity, where, as Brown summarizes it, speaking on Kapil's work, the movement is mini-directional. A character, Lalou, is literally moving. She is in transit via hitchhiking, which means in a sense that she has no idea in which direction she will move. Her body is spliced, part monster, part baby, part cyborg, part dream, to which I'd add part girl, part woman. She is moving in the direction of female identity, an identity between borders, between safety and risk, between any fixed notion of intimacy, and the question, how to be a person intact. She is revealed to herself within a moving landscape, but she is also hidden. She attempts to grasp the many convolutions and distortions of meaning that shake her to alertness. This mobile process is equally visible in Carson, where the reader is forewarned that the papyrus scraps on which the original fragments of this story are based withhold as much as they tell, just as upon one of the first scraps one reads, Jerian's dream began red, then slipped out of the vat and ran. As paradoxical as a dream running, or even being red is, since a dream cannot head off independent of the body and mind of the dreamer, or be colored as it is not tangible, readers find themselves grasping at straws as they attempt to pin down who and what Jerian is, and as he constantly runs on elsewhere. Chronologically, we are led to believe we are following Jerian from an emergent age, just forged perhaps, going from home to school where he is unable to navigate the building and halls, then from his own town to his first boyfriend, Heracles' hometown, Hades. Significantly, Hades is a town near a volcano in Carson's book. And later still, as Jerian will move to the mainland and then go study abroad in Brazil, and eventually, like Kapil's hitchhiking Lalou, find himself on a kind of road trip with a character named Ancash and his ex-boyfriend Heracles. He, Jerian, drifts towards a potentially climactic moment where he uses the wings he has always had to fly over and down into a volcano. It is at that moment readers may find themselves facing the conundrum of, did this happen before? And thus is Geryon an immortal returned and perhaps returning perpetually from the fires of lava. While this attempted pinpointing of the central character is being undertaken, readers are required to simultaneously attempt to track and partake in Geryon's own process of becoming alert to the meanings of the world, his perception of outside, as he himself seeks a way to name the self, his life, to tell his story as well. The book thus follows his attempts to record an autobiography, first through a red tomato sculpture, then writing, and finally in photos. He may in fact be red itself, as Carson's book title could imply, but more likely he is the object being modified by the adjective red, latched, as she talks about adjectives being latched by it to the world surrounding him. Though Geryon explores three mediums and does not prefer that of language, it is in writing where Geryon recounts what readers who know his namesake expected. This depicted on the screen, original Greek myth of his namesake, where he is slain and the red cattle are stolen. He titles this Total Facts Known About Geryon. Geryon was a monster. Everything about him was red. Geryon lived on an island in the Atlantic called the Red Place. Geryon's mother was a river that runs to the sea, the Red Joy River. Geryon's father was gold. Some say Geryon had 6 hands, 6 feet. Some say wings. Geryon was red. So were his strange red cattle. Heracles came one day, killed Geryon, got the cattle. Finally, Geryon had a little red dog. Heracles killed that too. Of this story, saturated with red, a familiar word, critic Stuart J. Murray asks, what are we to make of these words? Almost lyrical, with stilted, interrupting punctuation. What is a monster? What is red? Or in what sense can one's mother be a river and one's father gold? Immediately, autobiography is posed as a philosophic problem. Facts will prove utterly insufficient in the expression of a subjective life. In Hejinian, as the human of Mars goes through a process of naming other things and beings red X, red Y, the external world, their environment is, as one might expect of the planet, red. The unexpected saturation of color will eventually tint everything, not only outside, but inside them as well. This human of Mars, embodying a sort of Adam in the Eden of this red planet, at first creates or sees, in ways extends the landscape around themselves, thus moving their gaze outwards, presumably the body following the red ants, red candies, red controls, as they want, quote, to launch spectral red and do so, and whenever it arrives, it leaps into view, unquote. In such arrays of items as red prairie, red arithmetic, red reflection, red snow, until in the penultimate section of the poem they announce, I am incarnadined, the world is washed on me. As opposed to Geryon, who questions gender and who is clearly depicted in homosexual relationships, or Lalou with a spliced body, who seems to be trying to reconcile with a girl womanness, though she may be, in fact, a cyborg without any genitalia, Hejinian's off-planet character announces early on that he has no need for genitalia, stating, of what use will be cock or cunt? They are cavernous, decorative, extrovert. They may be, they say of themselves, hermaphroditic, such as a Mars worm, or be beyond gender, apparently both on an identity and sexuality level. As they explain, there are no orgies here in solitude, no rosy orifices, as there are no others on the red planet to contend with at first. Though later, fickle as the characters in Carson and Kapil's works appeared, this human of Mars seems to reassess, claiming that in the future, I'll have Martian genitals. And when I breed, as I must, I will have children, 17 or 34, which is followed by a list of children's names where both typical male and female are combined into one, and names from very different national ancestries are merged. For example, Belinda Fred, Georgi Clarice, Nano Shirin, Mustafa Pilar, Giuseppe Hua. The direction here, interestingly, is a return to planet Earth binaries, but in a resistance or reinvented format, having passed through red, converting the human of Mars on the whole, as Hejinian states in the final stanza, into an orifice, an absorber of all things, genders, beings, perhaps, returning to or looking down upon Earth, stating in the final line of the text, the world is an oyster and I am a Valentine. Thus, in the end, these characters, author, other, monster, cyborg, alien, reader, writer, are or become, as Carson put it in her book, a drop of gold, molten matter returned from the core of the earth to tell you, show us interior things. In my second, shorter section, I want to just give you some quick examples of specific uses of red from the books in chronological order, beginning with Carson. Carson does one of the most distinguishing things with red, which is to make us aware of how it is connected to perception, and in particular to a breach in communal knowing. This is embodied through Gerian's attempts to perceive the world, seeing and not seeing, being seen and not being seen, red, and how I see it. Perception, how individuals see the outside, see the colors of world, something we falsely believe we share, unless someone is colorblind or has impaired sight. She says, as this quote states, I will never know how you see red, and you will never know how I see it. But this separation of our consciousness is recognized only after a failure of communication, and our first movement is to believe in an undivided being between us. This is coupled with her application for Jacques Lacan's declaration, the reason we go to poetry is not for wisdom, but for the dismantling of wisdom. Thus her book also unteaches in a way about things, about faulty knowledge and perception, as it accentuates the questionability of fact or knowing or environments, or the role of adjectives in hooking and unhooking the world, connecting and disconnecting, undermining expectations or beliefs in shared understanding, as on the page where she states, when Homer mentions blood, blood is black, which of course is a moment we'd expect the color red to appear. It also does this in how parts of speech act. First, through a synesthetic exploration of red, mixing red as associated with sight to sound, thus associated with something heard, as in the line, quote, red drumming of wing muscle. I'll repeat that, red drumming of wing muscle. We hear the drumming, red is drumming. Red isn't the action of drumming, but is the sound. Secondly, that red as adjective does not only modify or stack, and she talks about adjectives stacked over things, atop another thing or word, but often seems to take on its own agency, exist as a being. Thus the title itself, Autobiography of Red, as if red could write for and about itself. For Kapil, red is the key trope for exploring perception as well, as the color red appears 74 times in the book, vermilion twice, and cherry once. In Kapil's case, red is most consistently related to body, whereas in Carson's we see it a lot of times applied to the external world, though Gerian is himself red. That of Lalou, in this case, from its internal blood coloring the skin, seeping from wounds, revealing its vulnerability to its outside experience, red dress or scarleting skin, its sexuality as seen in these quotes. Red is also intimately linked to label-based identity, from Lalou's name itself, based off of Lal, which means red, but also connected to her Indian origins, evoking the vermilion worn by women on their foreheads or hair parts when married. Lalou means red, because Lal means red, so Lalou means the red one. It is a masculine, sun-like name of Vedic origin, but I cannot change that. My alien number is A, number 786, etc. Red is used in terms of contrasting woman and girl, Munster and normal, foreign and native, where sometimes such connections, the aspiration for the perfect unread body, self, identity, combined with the process of writing, its intimacy embodied in and revealed by red, as in the quote I'm going to read that you don't have on screen, so intimate a text. Then it is a document related to shame flooding the body to make it red. Who doesn't want to heal a human body? Who doesn't want a perfect human body? The body of My Hitchhiker is, thus, inevitably female or Punjabi, fused to the production of secrets. In all of these examples, one notes a focus on body, gender, human or AI, cyborg passing as human, or monster failing to pass, demonstrating some visible abnormality to the rest of society, as throughout the book, Kapil returns to the question of what is a human girl, a woman. She even claims that this text is a memory of my body as a cyborg girl or adult woman, asking Lalou at one point, are you a woman? Were you a girl? And claiming I am half woman and half girl, half something else. A red girl with her forearms, waving my arms in the photograph of my birth, and thus recorded accidentally as an avatar of childhood and not a child herself, with her organs inside her body like the other children. Here Lalou is paradoxical red girl, for we generally associate a passage from girl to woman, as from pink to red, the becoming a woman via the red of menstruation, but also potentially is defined by the bleeding of the broken hymen upon first sex. In the end, the use of red in the book is about transformation once more. To summarize, what is the relationship to what pleases? This is the story of how I changed my structure, she says. Not being or becoming cyborg or girl or woman or mother or citizen, but going from one thing to another. As Lalou states in the second quote here, This is the story of how I became a red girl, which sounds bad, but I don't know how else to say it. I turned red over the course of my journeys. To put it another way, I changed from one kind of girl to another as a result of my experiences, an example of physical transformation generated by new environments. Yet Laloux's declaration is itself put into question. When asked, are you red? But are you red now? Are you red forever? From your hazardous travels that brought you to a different place, or was it easy? Was it incremental? Were you a girl and then a woman? A boy then a man? Did you grow wings when you were a cat and fly away to a different but no less lucrative scene? In the end, the Munster cyborg girl, woman, mother, traveler, immigrant fuses merrily into some body transformed, new, laying in this place covered by starfish. And I'm not going to read the quote, I'll let you read it. But you notice how red here, or the red being here, is encrusted with orange starfish, a marriage perhaps of the children's book idea of stars with their yellow light, mixing with Laloux's red body. Hejinian's work starts in a reverse position. In the one section I am addressing, the work is taking place off planet, outside terrestrial borders, of foreign and national assimilated outsider human interactions. Here, the red human, claiming to be in a choleric state, has fled, we're told early on, though in the final section, I had no plans to come. I never knew I had gone. The book's title, Tribuna'l, evokes judgment, authority, and a place of societal rules and ruling, and as such, Hejinian introduces into the trio of books being explored, red as the notion of halting, being halted, removed from society and the familiar concepts of life on Earth, time as stopped, on hold, there is glue on the root. As Hejinian states, this stop is tantamount to being imprisoned, counting down the days and hours of a sentence, where a prison sentence and a textual sentence become like two sides of the same coin, for which time is a series of unrelated sentences to be reread and then rewritten. The human of Mars may not originate on the red planet, but have been sent off to outer space, where we are told the human of Mars can confess. The human of Mars becomes a version of a blindfolded icon of justice who, as Hejinian writes, claims, I can see through the blindfold, and I can't see through the blindfold. Both of these statements are true. In this case, the sought-after tabula rasa mind, able to clearly see in order to judge and dispense justice fairly, is tainted by the red of anger, of bias. I lack a blank mind. Spheres of cover hover atop a deep plain. The red darts out. Doubt is the Martian's demise. I want to be without traditional consciousness, saturnine, lunatic, stellar. Thus, one could say, skybound, outside Earth. There, upon the surface of this heretofore uninhabited red planet called Red Leap, describing it early on, pre the arrival of others, the speaker initially finds themselves in their desired kind of Red Eden, where the soil is the refuge of no previous profile, and from that I must add to my own and germinate new ones. This germination evokes an emergence of life, just as the character speaking in first person names things in ways that seem to bring them into being, and all is red. There is something very much like the red environments of Carson's work, where red is grammatically following the rules, acting out its role of adjective here, modifying everything it touches. The list of things typically not red, suddenly red, as throughout the sections, frequent trio lists of red things appear. There is an almost excess of red, appearing 45 times in a 28-page long poem, although with 2 or more appearances of other red words as well: scarlet, vermilion, russet, sanguine, flame, fire, flare, and innumerable food items, flora and fauna, or minerals that we associate with red, from raspberries to roses, persimmons, geraniums, beets, and red meat, and echo to the initial section titles in Carson, and rubies. Like fire versus germination, dichotomies of red as habitually juxtaposed to green is how Hejinian closes her text, with a double quote as an afterword, the first declaring, as you see here, I sought to express with red and green the terrible human passions. The contrapuntal red-green from the color wheel here end up being red-green Martians, red-green planets, where this red human of Mars states, on a green planet, I came decamouflaged. Visible predator and visible prey. Whoops, visible prey. Declaring the duality inherent in redness, that is Mars, god of war, a warrior expected to channel anger and violence, thus who has predatory characteristics, versus the redness of trauma, blood and the wounds for a victim, thus prey, who may equally be the emotional prey of Cupid's arrow, love, since the human of Mars is the Valentine of Earth. Red here seems to be a word of negotiation, mediation, and emotion. It infuses things with rage and affection. Oxymoronic, juxtapositional, red seems to settle atop judgment scales, teeter-tottering towards and away from equilibrium. To conclude, for these 3 authors, color, and in particular red, end up being related to geography, nationality, biology, and ancestry, cultural constructs of self and other, where there is native, normal, pitted against the red, different, red, vulnerable, red, other, traumatized blood of injury, and red, resistant, the connection of red and angry, red and warrior, the red dissonant. Red relates to visibility, invisibility, and hypervisibility in all three of these works, where one finds explorations of human, extra, in unhuman entanglements. These authors are writing the communal, self and other, self as other, drawing the author and their characters and their readers into a shared space of expression and definition as one being molten together, much like what critic Finberg describes about the closure of an earlier essay by Carson, The Glass Essay, where we find, quote, our figuration, or the body of us all. Thus, the reader in the text, as opposed to the reader of the text. In this manner, these works perhaps enact change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for this comparative analysis of reading these three interesting books.